So you're currently in the market.
Mm-hmm. I
Okay.
am.
And you mentioned that you kind of narrowed down like either some of the fields or some of the things. So like what have you kind of done since kind of newly becoming on the market? What's some of the steps you've taken so far?
Um, I think at the beginning I was pretty overwhelmed. I was angry and I was frustrated with the situation I was in. And I think a whole bunch of thoughts came to my brain of you're doing the wrong things, you're in the wrong industry, you're in the wrong field, you need to go back to school. And then having like a whole bunch of different opinions in general come towards me. And then I think I started to just overthink in general about like my qualifications and everything. And then I took to LinkedIn and Indeed and whatever and started kind of just applied to a whole bunch of positions. And then I think I just got overwhelmed in general just because I find the industry right now is really bad at responding. Like some jobs that I had applied in May, I've gotten responses back to in like middle of November.
Wow.
So just in general, just lack of communication from the companies themselves have been really, really frustrating. Like it's almost like at this point too, when they are denying, it's just like a mass email that's being like, hey, we've went somewhere else. Like I'd like to know what I'm not standing out for, if there's something I need to evolve on or talk about more or whatever it may be. It's very undirected.
Yeah. I think there's like a couple things you've touched on, which I think are worth highlighting before we go any further. And for, I guess, context for anyone, we've never connected before, like haven't gone through your resume. One thing you mentioned obviously is like when you first end up back in the job market, like how overwhelming it can be. And then through probably like some reactivity, and it sounds like you're being proactive about it, but obviously you're still in a very reactive state. You start applying for lots of different jobs,
Mhm.
right? And you just kind of go like, okay, like what could be a fit? Who's going to get back to me? Maybe if I apply to a lot of stuff, someone will get back to me and I'll uncover like a really cool opportunity.
Mhm.
And then what happens is kind of like what you went through, which is like you don't hear back because like you're kind of in not in a negative way. I think you're like we call it like the spray and pray, where you're just applying for anything and everything that could kind of look like a fit. And again, we haven't gone through your process, so maybe you were more targeted, but in doing that it becomes like really difficult to put together a specific targeted application to
Yeah.
every single position that you're applying for. And then again, you don't hear back, which I feel like these days is viewed just as equally as getting rejected, if not more, because like you said, you don't know. And then one of the big like challenges that you touched on as well is like not getting feedback. And I know it's one of like the toughest ones in the context I try to give to people is like, as someone who, we're a recruitment and staffing firm, we get so many applicants. Like we literally come in on a Monday and we probably have 30, 40 open jobs posted. We probably have like hundreds, if not thousands of applicants that come in and over the weekend. Out of
Mhm.
those applicants, like all of our clients for my office here are all based in Vancouver, not in Burnaby, not in Richmond. Like we only work in Vancouver and North Vancouver, and we'll get applicants who are from like all over the world who want to immigrate here, some who are currently in the process, some who live like an hour plus drive away. And
Mhm.
in reality, if we're lucky, we get 10% of like the volume of applicants are actual viable for interviewing. And
Mhm.
even then, as an agency or the people who are in internal HR positions and they're working for the company to kind of screen through the process, they either don't have the time or don't have the ability to respond to everybody with like the reason for the reason. And again, as a job seeker in your shoes, like that sucks. Because it's like
Mhm.
if I just knew why I wasn't a fit, I could go. And if you told me like, hey, I'm really interested in this company. I want to work here. Tell me why you wouldn't hire me today, and I'll go get the skills so you can hire me tomorrow.
Yeah.
The challenge is a lot of times, like as recruiters, I've given feedback to a candidate before about why we rejected them. And immediately they went and gave me like a negative Google review
Mm.
and were like
Yeah.
unhappy. And like the reason I did it was truly to try to give them feedback. And they took it so personally and were like, I'm amazing for this job, even though like for us as recruiters and sometimes often for the HR people, we don't get to choose, right? It's our client who chooses. It's the, if you're internal HR and you're recruiting for an internal position, it's the divisional lead, the divisional manager who makes the choice. And our job is to play that kind of facilitator in between. For my company, we get paid to place people. So if I could place you somewhere, like I'd do it all day long. The
Mhm.
question is like what's actually a fit. And so I think through like learned maybe negative experiences, even though I've definitely shared feedback with a lot of people and had some people take it super well who are very appreciative of it. And I think that's what most people would be. But unfortunately, like the negative outweighs the good. And as much
Mhm.
as like if we do give that great feedback, it could result in someone coming back later. The
Mhm.
negative ramifications of being really open and honest with someone why they don't fit, like could greatly outweigh by somebody potentially taking legal action or whatever it may be if we like miss articulate something in the way things go these days, right? So, I think again, good on you for like the approach you took of going and like hitting the market and seeing what you can do. But
Mhm.
you, just like many other job seekers, then kind of put yourself in an even, it's not that you put yourself there, it's just that the market, the navigating of a job search is very challenging. And by not getting that feedback, you start to beat yourself up and you start to feel like, okay, like maybe I'm the problem, right?
Mhm.
Is that
Totally.
sometimes where you went and you were like, I have to relook at my schooling, I have to look at this. You're kind of touching on that.
Yeah, I like went right back to like what I got my degree in and then researched my degree again and then how do I advance and if I want this certification, like how do I process it and do I go like yada 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 and then it was another 8 years of schooling and then I'm this age and I just went down a rabbit hole and I just decided that I needed to like slow myself down. I was just overthinking
Mm,
and that's not going to get me anywhere. So just I had to start from zero and kind of explore myself and my interests. And I think that's now helped me. But again, it's hard because like you're saying, the market right now is you go on to a job that has been posted and there's already 320 applicants and you're like, holy crap, how
yeah.
do you how do you even stand out remotely?
100%. And that's such a great point that you bring up, which is, as you may or may not know, a recruiter who sees 300 applicants for a job, the rule of thumb in the industry is that your resume is going to get 6 seconds
Yeah.
of how long someone will look at it and determine whether or not you're a fit. Now, I've got your resume pulled up on like my other screen here,
Mhm.
and like I think your resume looks really good. I would argue that, if we got 100 applicants, 10% of the candidates' resumes show effort and energy and a real like proactive approach to refining and trying to really make your resume stand out. I think yours looks really good, to be totally
Thank you.
honest. And we can have like a beat up session later where I can go through and try to pick it apart.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's a piece that, would help you for sure. I think that if again you're in that pool of 300 candidates, the question is how do you not only get your resume to stand out, but how do you stand out as like a job seeker? Most companies these days don't expect or even ask for a cover letter. And I think the old generic cover letters like aren't going to help anybody where there's a lot of like, I'm an effective communicator and I'm really like motivated. Well, anybody can say that stuff. I think the stuff for me that like really stands out and resonates is you've just gone through this like introspection. You've gone through this like revisitation of where your like strengths lie, what your education is. Like you're kind of going down a path of trying to figure out what you want. That is the stuff that is ultimately going to result in someone spending more time. If you send something that like that along, like for myself, if I was applying for a job, I'd be really open about who I am. I'd be
Mhm.
like, I'm an avid golfer and a hockey player, and like I've got a little 10-year-old 10-pound dog at home that is like my little fur baby. And I love sushi and I love mountain biking up Mount Frome. And like, what are the things that no one else can say that is just a generic statement. This is legitimately who I am. You don't have to say all that stuff that's unrelated to the job. But again, if you're, trying to get your feet into the PR and media and digital marketing space, and like, you're a born and raised Vancouverite who eats up like the Vancouver lifestyle and do these things and have these passions and interests, like, why is that important? Because the reason that you will stay long term at a company, which is what the company wants, is because like you personally align in the same way that they do, right?
Yeah.
And like if they're a company that's full of yogis and they've all got dogs and they go for sushi on Fridays, and you say like, I go to yoga twice a week without knowing, and I've got my dog or I got a cat or whatever, and this is what I want to do, and they go, wow, this is like amazing. At the same time, they might be an office that like, they're all allergic to animals and they're all vegetarians and like they're like anti-workout people, and you wouldn't fit with them anyways, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's really important to know like who you are, what you want, and try to put something together that's going to make you stand out from the 300 applicants. And how to do that, like, again, it's really hard for someone like yourself who's in PR and media. Writing something like that might be a lot easier than someone who's in a completely different field, like an accountant or something like that, or even, someone like myself. I just don't have that like expression and that like creativeness, and it's hard for me to put stuff like that together. But that authenticity of like, why are you applying for this company? What about the company led you here? Was it that you saw 100 jobs today and this isn't the number 99th that you've applied for? Or is it that like you have a target list of 10 or 15 companies based in Vancouver that you want to work for, and that you're taking like an active approach? You saw this position, this is who you are. This is why I'm really interested in working here. And I think that ties into, a couple other points. One is, like, you're definitely a job seeker in an interesting time where there's a ton of change in the market. Like the job seekers and the employees have far more control than they did obviously 50, 60, 70 years ago, where, people worked for survival, right? Now survival is less of a factor, and it's more about like working with a company that aligns with your values, and that you have a job that you feel really excited about, and that you're excited to tell your friends about what you do and how you like make a difference and the impact that you have. And at the same time, like the companies know that the fight for talent is so competitive that once you're in, they're willing to offer these amazing like training and development and perks and all these different things. And for someone like yourself, the next role that you take in any organization is likely going to be one that is going to require a lot of investment from the company to like train you and onboard you and give you exposure to different responsibilities, roles, and tasks. And eventually they're going to want to get that return on that investment, and know that, I think the fear for a lot of companies is when they get someone who says like, I'm open to anything, is like, okay, well, then you're going to take this job today, but then something else is going to come along tomorrow that's going to excite you more.
Yeah.
Right. And not that that's the approach that you're taking, but it's more like there's these, whether it's underlying fears or just the underlying understanding of all the reasons that it's not worked before, are all like the mitigations of risk that the companies have to go through to ultimately truly assess fit. And so, for you to like overcome that, one is obviously proactively applying for the jobs which you've been doing. I would say, and again, haven't spoken to you before this, so don't know what approach you've been taking, but if you're just sending a resume, even if it's not asking for a cover letter, and some jobs may not let you, then like, what's another way to like get your info in front of whoever that person is? LinkedIn's such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
Right. And so you apply to company A, you send your resume in, all you can do is send your resume in. I would go on LinkedIn. I would find like the HR manager. I'd find like the department lead. Like generally all the companies are going to have these people listed there, and send like a friendly invite and be like, hey, I just applied for this position. I'm really interested in learning more and potentially working with your company. I'm assuming that like this position that you're involved in the process, or it reports to you. Even if I'm not a fit for this role, I'd love to like connect and kind of be a part of your feeds and see what like a fit looks like. And maybe I'd be a fit for something down the road. Right. And now you're taking like a really like proactive kind of like marketing approach almost to your job search.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The other like great stuff I've seen is like, picking that top 10 or 15, 20 companies that you would potentially be really interested in working for. And whether they've got jobs open or not is taking that same approach. Find like if you're in media relations and PR, find their like, director or VP or whoever that may be of communications or of public relations, wherever it may be, and reach out and be like, hey, I'm super junior in my search and I'm really interested in learning more about your company and what you look for when you hire somebody. I'm active in my search. I'm looking for work. I didn't see any positions that you guys have, but I could totally see myself working with you guys at some point. If you've got anything right now, I'd love to learn about it. If you don't have anything right now, I'd love to learn about like what would be a fit at your company down the road and what you'd want to see from me. If you were like, what, you don't have the skills and experience now, but apply to me in a year or 2 years or 3 years, what does that look like? And I
Yeah.
think you'd get a ton of traction through that because you're coming with like so much more value to the table with an approach like that than just here's a resume. Do you want to buy me?
Yeah. No, it's totally true. I started doing uh like I've obviously been applying for like a couple days or like a week, like a couple per day, and I started like writing out kind of exactly what I'm doing, because I've noticed a lot of the times is they'll randomly call me and they'll be like, hey, it's Kelly from so and so. You're like, holy shit, like which role was that again? And then it's kind of like a stutter of like, was that the events coordinator? Was that production manager? Like, what did I apply for that? And then they kind of put you on the spot right there. So I've started to kind of write out all the applications I've so far done and kind of writing out like the details of
Smart.
each one. Yeah. And then kind of putting like a check mark beside it of like, have I followed up? Like, where is the conversation at right now, etc., just to keep myself a little bit more organized, because they are like what you're saying, obviously, like those 10% that probably are viable, they're right away being like, hey, let's set up an interview. Like, let's found it.
Well, and you touch on like such a great point, which is, and it's totally unfair, but as like recruiters will call people throughout the day as we're able to get to certain steps of the process, and we'll talk to somebody, and
Mhm.
how you respond on that call can have such a great effect. And yeah, you might be in the middle of like, grocery shopping with your hands full, and you see a random phone number call and you go, oh, it could be a scam caller, or it could be a company call me back, and you go, hello, and like, oh yeah, it's so and so calling from this company. I mean, my memory's terrible, so like me trying to figure out, but often, if your response is something along the lines of like, oh, who is this? Like, well, I've applied for so many jobs lately, I don't even know like what position you're calling about. Like, you're dead in the water, right?
Yeah.
And so like whether it's a list like that or just knowing that if somebody does call, that it is totally reasonable for you to say, hey, sorry, I'm actually out right now. Do you mind? Sorry, just can you remind me, what was your name? What was the company that you're calling about? And like maybe don't even bring the position up if you know you've got a list, because I don't think it's a bad thing to say, can you remind me what the position was again? But at the same time, that could be like, well, how do you not know the position you applied for? Well, it's because like, there's 17, different titles for the same job across like 17 different companies. And I really applied for all the same job, but they're just called different things. But because you've got it called this, and if I call it that, then you're going to be like, well, no, that's not what this is. And if you're just like, hey, you know what? I'm totally in the middle of something right now. I'll be free in 30 minutes or an hour. Can I please call you back? Or can what's the best time for me to reach you? You've obviously got my resume. Do you mind email me? Whatever you do, if you've got that kind of pre-planned like statement, and then you can call them back and be like, hey, so-and-so, you called me. I know that I applied for this position. I'm super excited to hear from you. Like, how can I help you? What questions do you have for me? Like, I
Yeah.
think that's a great point that, again, it just shows like preparedness, and also just managing that challenging situation where you're kind of thrown into the deep end real quick. And let's be honest, that's going to happen lots in work, right? And so if you can manage that situation, then you're demonstrating a behavior of how you're going to manage that in the future.
Yeah, totally, totally. That's so true. I think it's smart to always do that, even if you're like the least bit hesitant, to just be like, can I call you back in 5 minutes, and just make sure that you have yourself organized, so then you're calling excited instead of calling like trying to piece it in your brain together. Because I've noticed that twice now when someone's called me and I'm like trying to remember and thinking about it, and it's almost like you can hear that through the phone, and I can tell that they feel that, and I'm not trying to give that energy, but I know it probably feels like that. So
Yeah, and again, I think like those things, they come all down to behaviors. Like in work all the time, we get random phone calls. I'll get a random phone call from a business today that we've never worked with before. And I've got 30 seconds to save that phone call that could be, a huge deal for us and a brand new client that we're bringing on, or where they hang up at the end of it and go, wow, that guy was terrible and doesn't know what he's doing. We'll never do business with them. Right.
Yeah.
And so when we encounter those scenarios in business, it may be like challenging, unfair, or, difficult. But again, it's all how you manage those conversations. And if you're not, maybe you're a really active job seeker, you're sitting at your desk, you're applying for jobs, you've got your long list, they call and they go, hey, I'm really interested in speaking with you. And you go, absolutely, I'm ready to go. Tell me,
Yeah.
how can I help you? Yeah, it's so and so from this company. And you go, oh yeah, I applied to this position. And they go, wow, that's really amazing. Like,
Yeah.
yes, that is the position you applied and you've got it dialed, versus, you're out doing something, maybe you're at the gym or wherever it may be. And how you manage that call in that situation where you're uncomfortable is, again, a huge indicator of how you'll deal with these things in the future if that happens in the business, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a challenging time. I think like it's hard too, and I think I've expressed like the frustration too to my parents, just in the sense that the time of job applications right now is hard, because you have graduates, like new graduates that were like 2019 that came out looking for jobs, and then COVID hit. And then you had 2020 grads that had COVID, 2021 grads that had COVID, and then 22 grads, new grads, or about to be, or wherever the heck. You have all these people that are looking for positions, and then people that are looking to accelerate their careers, and some that are looking to start off. So you almost have like this 5-year area of people that are all looking for jobs and are all able to apply to a certain level of jobs,
Mm,
which makes it hard if you're even trying to maybe start in a different industry or career. If you go to those type of beginner stages, those people as well from that are new grads or just came through COVID are looking to apply themselves, are applying for those as well. And then it just is like such an influx of applicants. It's so crazy how I'll come across things that are entry level or junior level or whatever the heck they are, and there's like 500 applicants. I think that's the part where it's like, oh my God, how do you ever find something? Like where, how? Like
yeah.
seriously, how?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the fact that you're even aware of like the factors that you're up against are like something that will help you as you kind of go and take these next steps. And the fact that you reached out and wanted to kind of connect, like, there's again that top 10% of job seekers far outweighs that bottom 80. And there's a lot of people that are in that space that don't understand those challenges that they're up against. And so I really feel like the critical piece is just to constantly be introspective, figure
Mhm.
out like who you are, where you want to go, what a fit looks like short term and long term, and to, clearly articulate that and look for opportunities that check those boxes. Because, again, with that influx of applicants, it doesn't mean that the companies all of a sudden have, you know, an extra 100 rock stars that they get to choose from. It just means that like there's an even greater focus on them trying to figure out who the people are that are going to be of value for me to spend more than that first 6 to 10 to 15 to 20 seconds to 30 seconds. Who's worth a phone call? Why do you get those things? How do you change that like outcome for yourself? And I think it comes down to really putting the time, effort, and energy. And again, like we literally see probably 1,000+ resumes a week. Your resume looks really strong. Like you've obviously put time, effort, and energy into it. I think the next piece just comes into like knowing that you're up against a lot, knowing that, like applying for jobs isn't like a everybody wins environment, and that it truly
Yeah.
is like the, survival of the fittest, so to speak. And that, if you don't succeed, like the people that will be successful are the ones that go, okay, I didn't get that one, but that isn't going to, uh, you know, knock me back, and I'm just going to keep my head up and keep going, and I'm going to keep pushing and have that kind of relentless drive to, find that next best thing. And like I said, I think applying to jobs is one, but then what are other avenues, what are other kind of strategies that you can take to try to elevate your chances of finding a position. And that's where I think that like social media piece of, if you identify a list of 10, 15, 20 companies, obviously it can be more or less that you really want to work for, and that you follow their LinkedIn pages and start to find the people on those LinkedIn pages that are within the divisions that you would specifically work for, or an HR person, and you kind of proactively engage and say, hey, like I'm a job seeker. I have you could be really open. I've got a list of, 15 companies in Vancouver that I am actively pursuing. I've looked at your guys' job board. I saw a position that could be a fit, but I know, you probably get a lot of applicants, and whether I'm selected for that one or for a position in the future, I'd be really interested in connecting and seeing like what you look for in a candidate, what a fit looks like, if I'm someone that would be considered. And if not, I'd rather know like now than find out the hard way after applying 15 times and never getting feedback, because you probably won't, and not, knowing why you're not a fit when, they're only looking for people that check this box and you don't check that box, and maybe you never will.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, again, it sounds like you're being proactive. You're like applying at the same time, like you're in a bit of a tough spot where December is definitely, things
Yeah.
do slow down a bit. I mean, there's still lots of positions out there, and the active job seekers will, potentially have like some greater success through it. And then same, through those 2 weeks of Christmas, it definitely slows. And then things generally do refire in the new year. And so it might be a time to kind of go like, okay, I'm going to keep applying, but know that like the odds are stacked a bit against you just because of the time of year, but no better time to kind of do those proactive reach outs, kind of figure out who those companies are, the roles, like why something would or wouldn't be a fit, and really figure out like, how you're going to kind of approach those businesses to try to figure out some better inroads to increase your chances of being selected if you do apply, or even have them reach out and say, hey, you know what, like you're definitely separating yourself. We want to talk to you.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's like the smartest thing to do is have like a key exact like top 15, 20 companies that I see myself working for, that I really like what they're doing and I could see myself being there.
Yeah, and then once you've got that, and you have to kind of remember like what your end game is with what you're doing when you're reaching out to these different people. Like nobody wants to be reached out and be like, hey, I saw this job, I applied for it, but I want to like apply directly with you. Can you hire me for this job? Right? Like I'm not saying that's what would you do, but like, that's not going to get you very far, versus if you reach out to someone and say like, hey, you know, I'm really interested in working with this company. I seen you've been with the company for a while. I assume you hire people. I'd love to connect and like pick your brain over virtual coffee and, try to learn more about what you look for, share a bit about myself. And if you see a potential fit, whether now or down the road, it'd be great to kind of see what that might look like. At the same time, if you do apply to a specific position, then the question is like, how do you make sure you're not just another resume on the pile? On Indeed, for example, there's screener questions where like there's an opportunity to answer some questions. Sometimes there isn't. And if there isn't, then again, that may be where you do specifically want to reach out to HR, to the hiring manager, and say, hey, look, there wasn't a way for me to upload my resume. Or, maybe you call the company and say, hey, look, like, I don't want to circumvent the process, but I really wanted to send a resume and my cover letter and a bit of an intro email. If they don't want to give you HR, then be like, well, can I send it to you, whoever the person at the front desk is, and can you forward it along? Like, otherwise, if you are just another paper in the pile, I'd rather try to do more through the process and not succeed than, to not do anything extra and not succeed. At least I know that I did everything I possibly could. And so again, trying to just figure out like what avenues and approaches you can take to like get your, I guess, like truly authentic self across so that they can see it. And again, like not every role would be a fit. Maybe out of those 15 companies that you'd love to work for, maybe 5 of them, they just would never be a fit. And you end up learning that the hard way. But then there's maybe 10 that like are a fit. And out of those 15, maybe there's 5 that are like, Sydney would be amazing for us. We just don't know who Sydney is yet.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think I also had to kind of snap back into reality, because even with the experience, I think I have such high expectations for myself and I want to be there now. And I think I've like started to build a resume where I'm like, okay, perfect, now I can be here. But I think I have to also realize that I am still new into the field and on my path, and not being scared to accept something of like a level down of what I wanted in order to get my foot in the door and get connected to people. So I think just also not being scared of starting small. I want to start big and go right into big, but not being scared of starting with something smaller.
Yeah, it's another really great point to me that all comes down to like really open and honest communication on both sides. Like we hire people into our organization all the time who, don't maybe have like the skills and experience, but know that if we hire them into the junior position, that's not where they want to be long term. And then if we don't have like a proper path on how they can get there and what a realistic time frame looks like, then we're creating like I guess a disconnect between both sides. And if you're like, this is a role I want to be in, I see that these types of positions are feeder roles and ones that are capable within your business. Like, what is a realistic time frame for somebody to go through that? And if they're like, yeah, it's anywhere from a year to 2 years. Well, when you're at the 6 month mark and you're like, well, what's happened? Like, why aren't I there? It's like, well, because we talked about this. It's a year to 2 years. A year is like really early. 2 years is like if you're not there by the end of 2 years, maybe it's delayed. Like you're 6 months in. Like, don't be pushing or fighting this battle because that could create like a kind of like disconnect internally. But again, if it was never discussed or described and there is that disconnect, then that's what kind of creates that turnover. And I think it's good to have that desire, but also really important, as you said, to be aware and to be open and say, this is something I want, but I also understand that you need people to learn and develop and, apply themselves and potentially be in a role for a certain set of time. Like we work with a number of clients that'll hire for more junior, what we call entry point positions. And they have an expectation that not only do you like take 6 months to a year to learn, but that once you've learned over that 6 months to a year, that you apply that learning for an additional year to really like, I guess inherently apply the return to the business, but also experience other things as a more experienced person in that role to then show that you're willing to put the time, effort, and energy in versus someone who wants the results now, which is like the demographic that you're from, right? Like the age of technology and information available at our fingertips and Google answering every question for us and being able to order an Uber and food and everything. It's all like immediate gratification. And so I think, like you said, kind of realizing that you may need to take a step back and you may need to delay that, and may need to kind of like understand what that path and time frame looks like so that there's a fair expectation on both sides is probably something that's really good, again, for you to be self-aware of, for sure.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you also have any advice to give, because I think the one thing that I also want, because I know like I've been doing a lot of research about like interview prep and whatever, and using like the STAR method and like highlighting the right skills in them. But when it comes down to like questions, do you think having like a really good, strong, like 4 or 5 questions to ask them that are out of the box is something I should focus a little bit more on?
A couple really good points that you touched on. I mean, I think, again, the fact that the STAR method is really good. I think the critical piece with the STAR method is not responding with some manufactured response. Like anybody who's got any like salt to them as an interviewer, who's interviewed hundreds or thousands of people, will see through the inauthenticity. Like it's really important to, again, if they ask about something in your resume that you've had experience in that you can speak to, I think, again, that STAR method is really helpful. I think, in any role, I always try to tie it into the bottom line and to results that you specifically accomplished, into what your achievements, what your responsibilities were. But not misrepresenting things and not over like selling someone on what your scope was or what your responsibilities were. I also think at the same time, the questions that you ask, I think they're super important. And I would wager that the most important part of asking those questions is that the questions are legitimately important to you, and that they are helping you get a better understanding of why the company or role would be a fit for you. And that you're not just asking like a generic like question. Like I've seen some good ones, and I wouldn't argue it's a good or bad, but where it's like, what would it look like for me in this role if a year, like what does success look like for me if you were to hire me in this role like a year from now? What does that look like? And then the mindset behind is that it puts you in the position that you've got the job in the decision maker's head, and they're looking at what success would look like for you, which is great. But like, if you're asking that question because you want to ask really good thought-provoking questions, like then if that's a really critical part of the job you're applying for, great. But if it's just you're asking because you want to sound like you're asking really good questions, like I would ask questions that are specifically of interest to you, where you're trying to get a better understanding, whether it's about, hey, I was on your website, I noticed this, like, is this an important, I saw your core values on the company website. Like one of my favorite ones when I do discovery with a business is asking them, and again, it's because we help companies hire, is like, are your core values legitimate? Do people in your business truly know what the core values are? And there's some companies that are like, they're on our wall everywhere, but we give it to people and their new hires, but if they really know them, I don't know. And I've got other companies where they're like, oh, it's legitimate in our business, like we literally talked about them, maybe not every day, but they're in our constant communication, they're on the walls, they're the real deal here. And if someone doesn't know what they are when they come and interview with us, like they're not going to be a fit, because they are such an important thing for us. And so again, I think like your questions need to be about what's important to you. Like, how do you determine whether or not this company is a good fit for you? And that it's not about you selling yourself on them. It's about like, you answering their questions to give them open and honest feedback about who you are and what you bring to the table, and also learning about them and what they look for in a fit, and whatever you feel is important for you. So yes, I think questions are important. I think obviously having those questions somewhat pre-planned can help, but pre-planned based on what and why. Like I always think that like the best question to ask yourself is, why am I asking this question? Like, what does the ideal answer look like? What am I ultimately looking to learn? Like again, there's some people where they want to work 100% remote. I think that's a really important question to ask if it hasn't come up, and be like, hey, I'm looking for a 100% remote position. Is that something you guys offer? And if they're like, no, we're 100% in office, then if it's really that important to you, are you going to hum and haw and be like, okay, well, I'm probably open to talking to you further? Or is it like, oh, okay, well, you know what, that's not going to be a fit for either of us because I want 100% remote. And even if I accept this job right now, 3 months later, when 100% job comes down, I'm going to take it. Right. What types of questions have you been asking?
Definitely like asking, I've asked that question before, kind of like, what does success look for like to you in your business? Asked about like work-life balance, because that one is definitely important to me after my last job. Yeah, kind of like what they bring to the table, like what challenges they kind of faced in their first year, why they chose to work where they are now, those types of questions.
And like, again, I'm not maybe an expert on coaching people how to interview. I would be cautious on how you like preface some of those questions. The question about like, what does success look like in the role? Again, I think it's a generally like okay asked question. I don't think there's a good or bad about it. I think like a better question that's asking the same thing is like, if I was selected for this position, like how would I know 3 months, 6 months, or a year? And how would my manager know if I'm like doing a good job or not? Right? Like, because I don't think it's about what does success look like. Success looks like the business is doing well and we're making money. Okay, great. Yeah. Like, do you know anything more about the position? Right? Versus if you're like, how, like 3 months in, how do we both know if like I'm doing a good job? Right? And if the answer is like, you're asking really good questions, you're absorbing the information, you're like taking on more responsibility, you're, asking a question, taking it and learning it, and not needing to ask that question again. If you make mistakes, you only make that one mistake that one time, learn from it, and build a system for yourself of how to ensure that you don't make that mistake again. Like that's the stuff that's going to help you go, okay, like I can kind of see how this role would look. Or, it could be that if it's a social media thing, that you grow our followers by X, and you go, okay, like I know I need to get on this like for the first 3 months and really show them that I can do this. The other one about work-life balance, like that's a like a sketchy question to potentially ask, because if you don't like preface it by saying, hey, in my previous position, I was expected to work like around the clock. Like there was no such thing as like my phone is off. If I got a call and it said I need to do this, I needed to do it right then and there. And it proved to be like extremely challenging. I'm not opposed to working like outside of the regular hours. In fact, I often find myself like doing that of my own accord, depending on how I feel about certain projects. But to me, like work-life balance is an important thing. I understand there's always going to be situations where like there will be needs for projects, or I assume that may be the case, but could you tell me a bit about like what the expectations would be on the role? Is it the case where there may be things or, odd hours of the night where I may need to do or be available, or is that like unheard of? And you're prefacing it based on like a previous experience, instead of asking the question like, so like, what's the work-life balance look like? When, how much vacation do I get? And when can I take my first day off? Right? Like it's a totally different question, right? Like, do you have unlimited sick days? Because I like, take personal days like once every like 2 weeks. It's, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? Like, this is not the time to be asking those questions. So I
Totally.
think like, again, like, why are you asking that question? Like, what's the underlying like problem that you're trying to identify and proactively solve? Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, I never thought about it like that.
I can't remember what were the other, there was a couple others. You remember them?
I said what made you like choose to work with this company? Like what drew you to it?
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, just on its own, like I think that's a really good one. Obviously, you've been there, and it's maybe even a good way to kind of go further with that one is like asking them how long they've been with the company for, and then what drew you to the company, and like since you've been there, did some of those things that attract you, did they ring true? Was there anything that maybe didn't happen? Like, were there challenges that you faced? Like, what has the life cycle been like for you in the role, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again,
Yeah.
I wouldn't ask it that way, but there's more to just like, like, so what is it like for you? Again, it can just be generic. So then it's, again, as somebody coming in, some of these things that are externally portrayed really excite me. Are they real? Right? Like what excited you when you were first coming in, and did those things ring true? Was it better when you came in? Like what would I expect coming into the company?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah, so that's kind of my situation right now.
Yeah. What else? Any other questions I can help you with?
I don't think so. I think that conversation is super motivating, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, like it sounds like you're doing a lot of the right stuff. Like I think you just need to be aware that, as you said, there's a lot of job seekers out there. I also, you know, I think one of the challenges you may be faced with is there's only so much information that can get shared in an external job posting. There may be information that can't always be shared. And as a result, you might apply for a job. And I've seen this many, many times where someone thinks they're an absolute dead ringer for a position. And yet internally, it's so far from a fit.
Yeah.
And how does that disconnect get created? Probably through ineffective like descriptions or writing of positions, or again, an inability to be maybe as transparent as they're wanting to be.
Yeah.
And that ultimately they either feel or believe that when they see the right applicant, they'll know.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of factors that go against your ability to kind of truly assess this job is like a home run for me and I'm a home run for them. I think you have to kind of take that out of it and just know that, um, you know, I've seen this position, I've looked at the company, I've looked at the job. Based on what I see, I think I'm a fit. There's the old like, if you meet 70% of the expectations and requirements, but you really have done your research and you think it's worth, it's not going to hurt you to send your resume in. Will it hurt you to just blindly send your resume in and do no follow up and do nothing to create that like willingness to engage? Again, even if it's a position that you're not 100% a fit for, and you're able to send a cover letter in that you address to the hiring manager and say, hey, look, like I'm applying to this job because I think I check a lot of the boxes, but I'm also, I can also see where maybe I've got some shortcomings and may not be a fit, but I'm really interested in working with your company. And if I'm not a fit for this role, I'd still be really interested in connecting to see like what you look for and if there might be a position in the future that could be a fit that you would suggest to keep my eyes open for. Like
Yeah.
it's an approach that is rarely taken. And again, just knowing that like, yeah, you're gonna apply to more than you're gonna hear back from. You're gonna interview more for than you're gonna get the job for. You're gonna, only get a few offers. And even then when you do, Like, just make sure you're taking the right thing for the right reasons and not because they were the one that finally decided, like, yeah, we'll give you a shot, right?
Totally. I totally agree. I think that's what I gotta get out of. I think I need to more so think about what's good for me instead of just finding a job.
Totally.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. That was so insightful.
And
Truly.